Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to the show. Kashmir has been a flashpoint between India and Pakistan, and 2018 has been one of the bloodiest years in the decade for Indian occupied Kashmir. Now, to discuss what is happening in Kashmir and what is the way forward for Kashmir, we are now joined tonight by President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan is with us. Sardar Masood Khan Sahab, thank you so much for your time. Sardar Sahab, let's just talk about 2018 first. Why do you think it was one of the toughest and the bloodiest years for Kashmiris in Indian occupied Kashmir?
The situation in the Indian occupied Kashmir is dark and dismal. This has been a catastrophic year. And this has been a catastrophic decade, as a matter of fact. I mean, for the past 7 decades, Kashmiris have been suffering. But with the passage of time, their suffering continues to increase. You said, what is the cause? The cause is the Indian occupation, because this is an artificial relationship. The 700,000 troops which are deployed in IOK are basically occupation troops. And India's writ in the occupied territory is not legitimate, and the people of the occupied territory, they have been rebelling against their occupiers for the past 7 decades, and their message in 1947 was that they were not part of India, and their message today is that they are not part of India. The slogans that they chant mostly say, "Go India, go back, leave our Kashmir." So this occupation must end. The Indian forces must vacate that territory, and the people of IOK must be given an opportunity to exercise their right to self-determination.
What has changed in Kashmir? Because Kashmir has been an ongoing conflict. 70 years Kashmiris have been fighting for their right of freedom of association. But as you mentioned, that this has been a very unfortunate decade for Kashmir, and 2018. So what has changed? Because what we saw that the number of casualties in Kashmir, they have increased.
I just want to highlight that each generation of Kashmiris has mounted a campaign against Indian occupation, whether it was the youth of 1947 or the youth of the 1950s, or whether it was the youth of the 1990s. And now the movement there in the Indian occupied Kashmir is being led by youths, mostly teenagers. This present surge in anti-India sentiment has come about after the martyrdom of Burhan Wani in 2016, because Burhan Wani was gunned down in a fake encounter, and in the aftermath of Wani's martyrdom, the Indians brutalized Kashmiris with the use of pellet guns. They killed hundreds of Kashmiris. They have deprived 6,000 people of their eyesight, either fully or partially. So because of this barbarism, because of this state terrorism, Kashmiris have said enough is enough. And they're talking openly about their alienation. They're talking openly about their affiliation with Pakistan, which would have been a natural link of the people of Kashmir with the state of Pakistan. So this is the cause. The root cause is the denial of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And the immediate cause is that Indian forces have gone berserk. They are killing and maiming and torturing Kashmiris, and they're dishonoring their women. And they rape Kashmiri women. Even they haven't spared even children. An 8-year-old Asifa was raped in January this year, January 2018. So the Indian atrocities in IOK border on the atrocities comparable to the ones which were committed by Nazis during the Second World War. There's a Holocaust, there's a slow-moving Holocaust going on in Kashmir for the past 71 years. This is the cause. And so, let me summarize it. Right now, what we need to do is to persuade the international community to put pressure on India to end these violent, horrendous human rights violations, which are in fact crimes against humanity in the IOK. And the second is that the international community, whether that's the United Nations or the influential capitals in the world, they should assist the people of Pakistan, the people of Azad Kashmir and IOK in finding a just and lasting solution of the Kashmir dispute, because it has been an open sore, a festering sore for decades.
Right, but Masood Khan sir, despite all this happening in Kashmir in 2018, and as you mentioned, it was widely reported. There was condemnation from human rights bodies as well. But we saw from India, the Indian response to that was that towards the end of the year, they imposed governor's rule in Indian occupied Kashmir. So how do you see, does India not care?
It doesn't matter to the Kashmiris whether India is holding these farcical elections there,
whether there is a so-called government or
whether there
governor's
is a dissolution of the assembly and there's governor's rule and then there's presidential rule and so on. This doesn't matter to the Kashmiris, because to the majority of the Kashmiris, because they do not associate with the Indian Union or the Indian Federation. This is immaterial for them. What is a stark reality for the people is that they are being killed every day and the youth there is being targeted. Let me tell you that this 2018, the year 2018 is also different in a sense, because this year on the 14th of June, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights issued a very comprehensive report on the horrendous human rights violations which are being committed by the Indian occupation forces. And these are being backed by the Indian government through their black laws. So this is a sweeping, a damning indictment against India. This has happened for the first time since 1947. So this is a very significant development. Second is there's a group called All Party Parliamentary Kashmir Group in the British Parliament. They have also issued a very comprehensive report. The OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, they issued a report. Now, international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, like Crisis Watch, like Amnesty International, Physicians for Human Rights, all have condemned Indian atrocities and in fact exposed the behavior and conduct of the Indian occupation forces. Why do I mention this? I mention this that while civil society, the Office of the High Commissioner, the United Nations Secretary General to some extent, they have been vocal about these issues and this unfolding disaster in Kashmir. The governments, like in Washington or in London or the European Union in Brussels, they've been tight-lipped. They haven't opened their mouths because they have aligned themselves with India. And for their economic reasons and for strategic reasons. So the challenge before Kashmiris is that while they're being brutalized and subjected to such cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, the so-called the leaders of the liberal order, they are silent and quiet.
So, Masood Sahab, I'll come to that. We'll talk about the international bodies and all these countries who stand for liberal ideals, and yet they turn a blind eye to what's happening in Kashmir. But coming back to what is happening right now, you mentioned youth. They now stand against India, and especially after Burhan Wani. So, what is Kashmiri youth thinking right now? What is the new thinking in Kashmir?
New youth in Kashmir, this is you can call them third generation or fourth or fifth, whatever you choose to call them, after 1947. Their message to India, to Delhi, to the international community is that they will win freedom under all circumstances and that they would continue their struggle and they would not be coerced into submission by the Indian government. They would not be subjugated. This was the message which the Kashmiris gave to India back in 1947 or in 1990. But India has been ignoring these signals, and it has deluded the international community into believing that India is fighting terrorism in IOK. In fact, the Indian government is the terrorist in IOK. They are using state terrorism to suppress the will of the Kashmiris. And the youth of Jammu and Kashmir, the youth of IOK say that they would not abandon their freedom movement.
Right, so there is more awareness.
More awareness, and teenagers, including girls and boys, students in the universities, also in the marketplace, wherever youth is there, they're leading this movement right
And
now.
how do you think that when we talk about 2018, so we also have to see that what happened in Kashmir, in Indian occupied Kashmir for last 3 or 4 years, and BJP's, Modi's government. Do you think that has also aggravated the situation and contributed towards what is happening in Kashmir or what happened in Kashmir in 2018?
To a great extent. I would say that one of the most potent threats that the world is facing today, and particularly people in South Asia, is the rise of Hindu extremism, or this philosophy of Hindutva, backed by the BJP and also by Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Because people have been talking about Islamic fundamentalism and Islamic extremism and so on all over the world. But in South Asia, the rise and legitimization of Hindu extremism, violent extremism, systematized violent extremism is a threat to the entire population of South Asia, but particularly to the people in Jammu and Kashmir. You know, Narendra Modi used to call it, and still calls it, muscular policy towards Kashmir, which means kill as many Kashmiris as possible, kill them brutally, give them the kind of punishment that they cannot bear, and then they would accept India's writ. But it is not working. This muscular policy is not working. It is in fact backfiring. And this is not what I'm saying. This is what Chidambaram, their former finance minister, said some time ago. He's been regularly warning the BJP government that you're crossing the line. In fact, Yashwant Sinha said the same thing, one of their former ministers, BJP ministers. They've been warning them that this muscular policy would not work, that you have to talk to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, you have to talk to you have to heed their voice, or you have to understand their problems and their aspirations. So I would say, yes, this has been one of the factors, but it hasn't worked for India. Let me tell you, yes, the Kashmiris have been captive for the past 71 years, but the bigger irony is for India, because after 70 years, they have not been able to integrate the occupied territory into their federation. Despite all their efforts, they used naked brute force, they used economic blandishments, they tried to raise their own parties like the National Party, National Conference, or the People's Democratic Party.
Right.
And they have presented Kashmiris as militants.
What do you think that
nothing has worked?
What has led Modi, Indian Prime Minister Modi, to this path? Because I think elections are coming up in India, and when for any politician, it will be very difficult to actually get himself in a situation where you're saying that the Indians, even they know now that what is happening in Kashmir is because of the policies of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
I won't differentiate between Narendra Modi's policies and the policies of the Congress Party. I mean, they were also not angels to Kashmiris. They also used brute force against the Kashmiris. And other Indian governments, they have been refusing to recognize the reality in Kashmir. You asked me a question. I mean, the BJP believes that Jammu and Kashmir is a part of India, or is an integral part of India. This is a lie that they are living. And because of this lie, because of this falsehood, all their approaches towards Kashmir are skewed. and they do not produce the results that they
My
want.
question was like, why the situation in Kashmir does not concern the political elements, be it Kashmiri political parties and the mainstream Indian political parties. Why it does not concern them?
It does. I think that some voices in the Congress party and other political parties, regional parties, they've been raising their voice about the human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Indian occupied Kashmir. And there have been some voices in the civil society there. But these voices are meek. There are some bold voices like Arundhati Roy and Pankaj Mishra and others. They have spoken up against this kind of reign of terror in Kashmir. But you see, but we do not have a critical mass of these voices. This is because of majoritarianism. This is because of this Hindutva. They think that this is their renaissance, this is their resurgence, and they think that if you give a dissenting view on Kashmir, these zealots would punish you in one form or the other. Of course, the state is against you as well if you speak up openly about Kashmir, but also these extremists and zealots, they will go after you. And that's why there's a kind of self-censorship in India about Kashmir.
Right.
By and large, although as I said that there are some courageous voices speaking for the rights of the Kashmiris.
Right. Sardar Masood Khan, I need to take a break now, but when we come back after the break, we'll discuss how Pakistan approaches the Kashmir cause and the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir at the moment. We'll come back after the break. Welcome back after the break. Tonight we are joined by President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan. Masood Khan sahab, before the break we were talking about what is happening in Kashmir or what happened in Kashmir in 2018. But let's just not talk about Pakistan's role. As President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, how do you see Pakistan's role and Pakistan's approach towards what is happening in Kashmir?
Pakistan has been steadfast in its stance and its struggle for the realization of the right to self-determination since 1947. So for that, we are grateful to the governments of Pakistan, to the state of Pakistan and the people of Pakistan. And, Pakistan has said consistently that it supports Kashmiris and extends moral, diplomatic and political support to the Kashmiris to their just and legitimate movement. So, as you would know, in the past, some experimentation was done by resorting to military means. I mean, India and Pakistan fought three wars on Kashmir. And there has been asymmetric warfare also from time to time. But the current phase is of diplomacy, insistence on diplomacy. It doesn't mean that when people were resorting to military means, by that I mean India and Pakistan, in fact, both countries, that there was no diplomatic track. But Pakistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir have been consistent in their stand that you cannot have a military solution to the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, that you will have to sit around negotiating tables, that you will have to go back to the United Nations, and you have to implement the UN Security Council resolutions, which gives you a blueprint for the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. And these resolutions are still operative, and the issue of Jammu and Kashmir is on the live agenda or the operative agenda of the United Nations Security Council. Pakistan and the Kashmiris have also not closed doors in regard to other opportunities and avenues. For instance, I mean, there could be conciliation, there could be third-party mediation, there could be even we have invested our time and energy in bilateral talks.
Right.
with India in composite dialogue, in comprehensive dialogue,
But
and
what
so on.
we have seen between Pakistan and India, and especially in 2018, that there is a complete deadlock. Pakistan and India, they have not been talking to each other. The composite dialogue that was between the two countries, it's not taking place. But there was an opening, and that was Kartarpur corridor, and it was an out-of-the-box idea. How do you see Kashmir between India and Pakistan post Kartarpur corridor?
My take on Kartarpur is that it is a unilateral initiative which was taken by the government of Pakistan, and it was warmly reciprocated and applauded by the Sikh population in India and abroad. And ultimately it was backed by the Indian government, but grudgingly, because as you would recall that they also tried to
Initially
spoil
they
the
refused to
atmosphere.
actually.
Yes, absolutely. But it's a unilateral gesture, unilateral diplomatic overture without any expectation of reciprocity from the Indian side. But I think that on the moral plane, it is our just expectation that while Pakistan has taken this huge, big stride, India should reciprocate by ending human rights violations in Kashmir. I mean, that's the first thing that it can do. It is gunning for political activists, and it is gunning down teenagers and youths in these notorious cordon search operations. This must come to an end. But let me tell you that the story starts way back in 1972. It is at that time that we signed the Simla Agreement. Our interpretation of the Simla Agreement is that it doesn't restrict India and Pakistan to go to the international community, to the United Nations. But India, after Simla Agreement, has insisted that now the Kashmir issue would be discussed only bilaterally. But that too is a hoax, because they have never pursued the bilateral track diligently. What happens is Pakistan is keener on bilateral dialogue than India. And usually they are dismissive about it. They make Pakistan beg for these bilateral engagements or bilateral talks. Once the agenda is drawn up and agreed and endorsed, they come up with excuses and pretexts to sabotage the talks under the bilateral rubric. So you can conduct a forensic audit of the bilateral talks starting in the late 1980s. They produced nothing. And again, in the current phase, I mean, if you go back to 2015, there was some semblance of engagement, or there was a rumbling of engagement between the two countries, but then that vaporized. And now what you have that India has closed all its doors for talks with Pakistan. So the onus is on India to re-engage Pakistan. Let me also tell you that since they are the status quo power, since they want to perpetuate their occupation in Indian occupied Kashmir, they have absolutely no interest in reopening the avenues for negotiations on Kashmir. The visitors who have gone to India and they've talked to Indian politicians and political analysts, they give us this feedback that in any case, until the elections and until after the elections, there are no chances of
So India is not willing to talk to
Pakistan on Kashmir, because in fact they capitalize in their election campaigns. They capitalize on their this hard, brutal policy towards Kashmir, because this surprisingly this translates into electoral gains there.
So Dasab, in Pakistan, we have seen a lot of focus on Kashmir with the newly elected government. Prime Minister Imran Khan talked about Kashmir in his first speech, and then he said, I want to approach India towards settlement of this conflict. We have seen on and off statements coming from Prime Minister as well as other government ministers as well. I remember Shri Mazari, she is a human rights minister, she talked about an island model for Kashmir. Do you think that there is scope for out-of-the-box ideas
I would say that it takes two to tango. I mean, we can't prepare a recipe unilaterally and sell it to the Indians or to the international community. And in this case, in regard to Jammu and Kashmir dispute, it would take three to tango. And the third party is the people of Jammu and Kashmir, which are the key constituent. So any formula which is prepared, whether it is the Ireland formula or something along the lines of the Ireland Good Friday Agreement, or let's say about the formula which was given by President Musharraf, you have to take all stakeholders on board. And it has to be a legitimate process. It has to be a participative process. It has to be backed by the people of Jammu and Kashmir, who are the main stakeholder. Because in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions also, it is the people of Jammu and Kashmir who have to decide about their political future and about their political destiny. So it would be wise and prudent to consult all stakeholders before preparing a recipe or a formula. Right. Because situations, I mean, like for instance, you referred to Ireland. Ireland may be similar to Kashmir to some extent, but it may also be dissimilar. So every situation is unique. Kashmir is unique. It may have similarity with some other disputes to some extent, but the two situations would not be identical.
But these new approaches, do you think that they impact situation in Kashmir or Kashmiris in some way? Because what we saw during Musharraf's era, we saw these new proposals and out-of-the-box ideas. And then there was this sentiment among the Kashmiris that Kashmir cause was harmed by those ideas. When you present such ideas, you show that maybe you are flexible with your positions.
You know, in diplomacy, the first thing that you do, whether you are having bilateral talks or you are participating in multilateral diplomacy exercises, or even behind the scenes talks or engagement, you do not make unilateral concessions. You do not make concessions prematurely. And in fact, there has to be an atmosphere of engagement. There has to be a salutary environment for engaging all the parties. When that kind of business or transaction is taking place, then the time is ripe for making concessions, and the concessions should be made by all the parties.
It must be reciprocated from
all the parties. Yes, it should be. But let me tell you, as I said, responding to another question that you had posed, that we're grateful to the people of Pakistan. We're grateful to the Prime Minister, also the Foreign Minister, for the statements that they've been issuing. I think the Prime Minister also spoke to Secretary General Antonio Guterres about these brutal killings in Kashmir. And so I think that this goes on to show that Pakistan is sincere, that it is ready to demonstrate diligence in regard to the exploration of a just and lasting solution for the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
Sardar Masood Khan, I need to take a break, but when we come back after the break, we'll talk about international bodies, OIC as well, and how other countries are approaching and looking at Kashmir after this break. Welcome back after the break. Tonight is an exclusive with President of Azhar Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan is with us. Masood Khan Sahab, you mentioned earlier that international bodies and all these countries who stand for liberal ideas, Western democracies, they have their own compulsions for not looking at Kashmir. How do you see that? How can that be changed if Kashmir cause has to be highlighted at the international level?
Well, this is a barrier, and we have to remove it. But first we have to ask this question, whether we are going to them on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir regularly and consistently? Are we knocking on their doors? Are we coming up with fresh proposals? Are we drawing their attention to the serious human rights situation in the Indian occupied Kashmir? And I would say yes, we are going to them, but I think that we must intensify and step up our campaign. We should go more frequently to the international community, to other capitals, and that would transform the situation. We have to engage the international community because in Pakistan there's a bit of confusion. People think that somehow bilateral engagement with India would deliver dividends. This hasn't happened in the past 3 decades, and I personally believe that this is not the path that would deliver a solution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. We have to go back to the international community. We have to make the international community a stakeholder. The international community is already a stakeholder because it passed the UN Security Council resolutions. People would argue that the international community is not willing to engage, or it is reluctant to engage because of its close relations with India, major powers, close relations with India, Western powers, close relations with India. And there's strategic partnership.
So what you are saying is that we have to look at it from a perspective of international community rather than a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan.
Absolutely, because that's an illusion, that's a mirage, that bilaterally, by engaging India, we would be able to get an advantageous dispensation on Kashmir. Because look at India's posture and position. They believe in annexing that territory permanently to the Indian Federation. So they are not interested. And they say, whenever these bilateral talks have been held, they would sit across the table and they would say that we can't talk about the India can't
we can talk about
Kashmir
anything else but Kashmir.
Because it is an integral part of the Indian state. And if we talk about Kashmir, in fact, Pakistan is interfering in the internal affairs of India. They would also add that if there's anything to be talked about, it is Pakistan-backed terrorism or militancy in IOK, or the occupation of Azad Kashmir, or they call it Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So, given that kind of framework, you can't sustain a conversation on Kashmir, let alone find a solution.
There can be no meaningful conversation in that context.
And that's why I think that President Musharraf had come up with that formula of demilitarization, and the second was the status quo in regard to the borders, and the third was self-governance and joint mechanism. But that formula was also primarily about maintaining the status quo.
But Siddharth, you rightly mentioned that countries individually, they might have their economic and strategic compulsions when it comes to India. India is a bigger economy, a bigger partner, and it might be okay for them to look away from Kashmir. But what about international bodies? You've been a diplomat, you've been at United Nations. Why do you think that UN does not have that proactive approach towards Kashmir?
The two reasons. One is realpolitik is also dominating the United Nations Security Council, or even the Secretary General is influenced by that. You have 5 permanent members and they're not taking interest in the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. So this is one factor. But the other factor is that we have not been using the international track very effectively, very consistently and frequently, because I said that there's this belief that somehow by engaging Indians we would be able to get some concessions on Kashmir, or we would be getting a just dispensation for the people of Kashmir. I think India has to get involved because India is a party to the dispute. It is right now occupier of the disputed territory, one part of the disputed territory. So yes, India has to be there. India has to be engaged. But we should not abandon our recourse to the international community, because that is a strong point in the Kashmir movement, and we should not scuttle it ourselves.
Right. So that's up. Now let's just come to the point. What's next for Kashmir, and especially in 2019? Do you think that any meaningful dialogue can take place between the three parties, Kashmiris, Indian, and Pakistan, be it with the support of international community or otherwise?
Right now, there is no framework for a structured dialogue between India, Pakistan, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And there have been talks between India and Pakistan, but Kashmiris have been informed, Pakistan has been informing about the results of negotiations with India, or the outcome of the talks, or lack thereof. But there is no framework. But we will have to create that kind of framework if we really want to make some movement. But what I want to convey to you, and through you to the wider audience that you're trying to reach out, is that Kashmiris have vowed that they would win their freedom. And they're persistent and they're giving sacrifices. The Kashmir movement is alive because of the sacrifices that the Kashmiris are making. And the second message that I want to give to the international community is that there is no terrorism which is being practiced by the Kashmiris right now. The Indian propaganda is false. According to their own figures, there are only 230 militants there pitted against 700,000 troops. So in fact, the troops are not there to kill or neutralize these so-called militants, but to crush the will of the majority of the Kashmiris there, the civilian population, the unarmed people. And Kashmiris, I have said it very frequently, are the most unarmed people on earth, completely made captive. They're being crushed there. So despite this kind of hostility and aggression by India, Kashmiris' resolve is to win their freedom. And the people of Azad Kashmir and the people of Pakistan have also taken this sacred vow that we would continue to support the Kashmiris until they get their right to self-determination.
So do you think that there will be any respite for Indian-occupied Kashmir in 2019?
I don't think so.
Even after the Indian elections?
I don't want to speculate. It would depend on the kind of government that we would have in India. But their template for Kashmir, I mean, whether it is the political government in Delhi or whether it is the armed forces, the occupation forces, the template is kill Kashmiris and commit all sorts of crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, ethnic cleansing, deprive them of their citizenship or change demography. This is a lethal brew for the Kashmiris.
But post-election, post-Indian election, as there will be a new government in India, there is a new government in Pakistan. Do you think that there can be a fresh push for resolving this conflict?
Yes, there would be. I think that Pakistan would continue to take initiatives in that direction. The Kashmiris also want some sort of engagement between India and Pakistan. We do not want to rule it out altogether. Whenever there are bilateral talks, even if there is no progress, it helps build the atmosphere, and it sort of opens the space for confidence-building measures. So we do not want to rule that out, but India will have to change its operating policy towards Kashmir for that to happen.
Right. Sardar Masood Khan, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. That was Sardar Masood Khan, President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. That's it from tonight. Thank you for watching Center Stage. Have a good night.